It's the Ricochet Podcast with Rob Long and Peter Robinson. This week we speak to Byron York about D.C. and Andrew Gutmann about woke education.
Our friend Byron York is the chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner and a Fox News contributor. I would add that in my judgment, he is one of the two or three best political observers and writers. He's a reporter. He reports, he makes phone calls, he does the work to find out what's happening. One of the two or three best in the nation, and I can't think of the two or three others. He writes the Daily Memo newsletter. He hosts the Byron York Show. I want to repeat this. He hosts the Byron York Show, a podcast available on the Ricochet Audio Network. He is in the tough and rough and tumble world of American politics. He is a gentleman's gentleman, and he comes by it honestly. He's an Alabaman, and as we speak to him, those of you who are listening can't see this, but just picture a man wearing a jacket and tie to record a podcast. Byron, welcome.
Thank you very much. Listen, I thought about this. I thought, first of all, I appear on Fox News fairly frequently, and I do it right here. It's in my home. And I always put on a coat and a tie because you don't want to, look like a slob on television, Brett Baer is there, and he's got a nice suit and a tie and a pocket square. I mean, he does not do special report in a sweatshirt. So I thought, well, what should I do for the Ricochet folks? The same thing. Here I am.
Same thing. Well, we were impressed. I mean, I noticed you didn't specify that you're wearing pants, and I don't need you to prove to me that you are or you aren't. We'll just assume for now that
if I don't answer the question, people can make all sorts of terrible assumptions here. But yes, I am in fact wearing pants.
Oh, you're wearing pants. All right. So
your standards are higher than ours.
That crisis averted. It is now April, end of April. We've had President Joe Biden for 3 months, 90 days.
Yep.
More than 90 days. Is it almost 100 days? It's almost 100 days.
93 right? Today, I think,
93.
maybe something like that.
Everything's great. He solved all the problems. So we have a crisis at the border. You can call it anything you want, but it really looks like a crisis. He announced today that the most ambitious, to me, insane climate change initiative. Then announced at the same time on Friday, gigantic tax hikes coming. He says for the rich, but corporate tax hikes are coming, which means a tax hike for everybody. Is he crazy? Is he crazy like a fox?
War. Don't leave out war. The Russians are massing on the border of Ukraine, and Joe Biden's talking tough to them. The Chinese are flying over, violating Taiwanese airspace every single day. And to them, Biden doesn't seem to say a thing. But okay, Byron, sum it up for us. Where are we?
Well, first of all, so far, his approval ratings are quite good.
Yeah.
They really rank among as good as any, Donald Trump aside, who was low the whole time, as good as any in the past since, Reagan. So what's going on? I think, it was interesting. You talked about the crisis on the border. That is the one crisis that the White House will not admit is a crisis. And about a week ago, the president kind of inadvertently, maybe he just let the cat out of the bag, he called it a crisis. And so the White House press corps then says to the White House spokeswoman, Jen Psaki, well, now the president's called it a crisis, right? And she said, no, she actually flip-flopped on behalf of the president and said it's not. But if you look, and I went back and looked at all of these briefings, they're calling things crises all the time. Gun violence is a public health crisis. There is, of course, a climate crisis. They had the Commerce Secretary on who talked about the semiconductor crisis. There's a maternal care crisis. I mean, they talk about crises all the time, just not the one that Joe Biden created himself. So what's happened, I think, is that one, he's given those Americans who wanted a sense of relief after Donald Trump, who it was just too much for them. Maybe they didn't even hate Trump. It was just too much for them. He has given them that sense of relief. And the other thing he's done is he's done a very skillful job of portraying himself doing this sort of heroic work against all of these big problems that he's rolled up his sleeves and is taking on. As a matter of fact, during the transition, Ron Klain, who's now the chief of staff, said they had 4 concurrent crises: the COVID crisis, the related economic crisis, the climate crisis, and the racial equity crisis. So he's actually done a good job of declaring crises and putting himself on the right side of them, and telling everybody he's just doing his darn best for everybody.
Right. Of those crises, it seems to me almost all of them have gigantic federal price tags attached.
Yeah.
Trillions of dollars being spent, and they, today they announced they're putting off the $1 trillion healthcare, I guess, solution. Although we already had one, but whatever. They're putting that one off for later. Probably what I would imagine to be closer to midterms, closer to making it an issue.
Yeah.
Where is the opposite? What happened? Like, I don't know how to put it. Like, what happened? We went from a country that was like that essentially refused to do these big things, these federal programs, $1 trillion this, $1 trillion that, and we kind of just changed our mind.
Well, look, nobody's really been serious about fiscal responsibility for a very long time. I mean, George W. Bush wasn't, Obama wasn't, Trump wasn't, and now Biden isn't. I mean, just really, you've got the occasional Tom Coburn, the late Tom Coburn, the senator, but the parties are not.
But there's a difference. There's a difference between not caring about spending or not being exercised or not trying to rein in federal entitlements and this is, there's a difference between like, hey, listen, I let myself have a couple drinks every now and then, and I'm going on this multi-day bender. This is like the lost weekend period. I
think there was a sense of delayed gratification, or on the flip side of frustration, among the Democratic base, who came out of the Trump years so angry, because you have to remember, they thought with the election of Obama and the re-election of Obama that they had kind of cracked the code and that there would be Democratic presidents from now on, because they had put together a new coalition, the Obama coalition, of minorities, young people, women, plus demographic change would favor them. And they basically literally thought that was it. No more Republican presidents. And Donald Trump just absolutely blew that up. Their anger never went away. And I think that they felt that after the Trump aberration, they had to just grab for everything. So we all know they were talking about the Green New Deal. They were talking about massive COVID bills, which they've already passed. They were talking about packing the Supreme Court. They were talking about making the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico and others states. And they themselves ended up being frustrated. Even though they win the White House, they barely win the House. And then the Senate's tied 50-50, and yet they still want to do all this. So what we're seeing now, I mean, all they've done so far is to pass this enormous COVID bill. Right. The big things that they want to do, the infrastructure bill, plus whatever they're going to do in the Supreme Court, all this stuff, they haven't done it yet. And they may have a very difficult time doing it. But I think what you're seeing is this kind of pent up energy and frustration coming out on the part of the left. And they've got this kind of elderly, kindly sort of man as their figurehead president.
Not all that kindly.
Listen, I'm with you on that.
Yeah,
but he's got a pretty good image right now in the polls.
Right. Yeah.
And so Biden is presenting a moderate face. He was always the centrist in the Democratic race. Well, he's the centrist face of the party right now.
I would say that maybe he's presenting half of a moderate face because he's always masked. So the other portion that
Did
we're
you
not.
see that climate?
Yes, he's on
science
Zoom
thing?
alone by himself on a Zoom call, and he's wearing a mask. So I'm thinking
Tons of world leaders, tons of little pictures on the screen, and there's one of them wearing a mask, and it is President Biden.
right. So the moderate face that he's showing us is the top part. The immoderate side is masked, and when it comes off, you mentioned the infrastructure crisis, of course, because we have bridges thundering down into rivers all across the country, because we haven't spent any money on infrastructure for 50 years. That's what we're being told. So we're going to have infrastructure bill and everything is infrastructure. Reparations are infrastructure, racism is, it's all. But even so, there are quantifiable goals that you can have in an infrastructure bill that says we are going to repair X number of bridges, X number of miles of roads. Right. Even if you say that broadband is infrastructure, even though that's ridiculous because the Starlink system is going to beam down to all these rural communities and the federal government doesn't need to run fiber optic to the barn, that still is a quantifiable objective. What worries me when you talk about the racial equity crisis, this is an open-ended excuse to spend whatever you want and to inject the government into absolutely every area of society. The new education standards that the president's team came up with are very explicit about the 1619 Project and Ibram X. Kendi's anti-racist ideology being formally embedded into the American school system. So this is something that they can do and never have to account for what it is. It's an ongoing rolling of this ideology into American society. So my question to you is, do you really think that Joe Biden trotting out there talking about how the country is systemically racist, him being a part of its governing class for half a decade, does he believe this? Does he know it? Does he know what is he convinced at all that all of a sudden this new gospel is part of his political soul, or are they just handing him a sheet of paper and he's reading it because it sounds good?
Well, part of the governing class for half a century.
Right.
Yeah. Does he really believe it? There are a lot of liberals who were liberals 10 years ago, and are not entirely on board with being woke today. They were always liberals. Joe Biden's always been a Democrat. He's been Joe Democrat all of this time, and I don't think he's extremely woke. But that's where a lot of the party's activists are right now. And listen, the things you were talking about, the 1619 Project, other issues that are put under the category of racial, quote, equity. That's not a financial worry to me. It's not a budgetary worry to me. It's a cultural worry.
It's a cultural worry, yes.
Which is a very, very big cultural worry. And all I can say right now, and this is not the normal thing I cover a lot, is that we're in a period right now, and they come and they go, and we have a lot of agitated people on the left who just want to pass all sorts of bills. They want to pack the Supreme Court. I had some guy on my Twitter feed yesterday talking about the district. He clearly knew something about issues, talking about making DC a state and citing a Harvard Law Review article from last year that got some note, which suggested making each of Washington DC's 127 neighborhoods a state, to bring equity to the Senate. It was really in the Harvard Law Review. What's the George Orwell statement? Some ideas are so stupid that only an intellectual could believe them. But I just think we're in this moment where a party, and I mean the Democratic Party, has just kind of gone around the bend for a while, and it's going to have to work itself out.
So Byron, you're describing to us the government of the United States is a great exercise in therapy. Some large component of the country is still just lying on the sofa with an ice pack on its head, feeling better that Trump is gone, but not really up to real politics again. Then you've got the left venting. Any serious analysis suggests that they didn't win by enough to get through the radical agenda that they're going for, and yet they're going for it all the same. This is theater. Well, theater. Let's stick. It's politics is therapy. How long can we afford this? How will Russia and China wait for us to calm down and return to normal. But by the way, so part of what Biden had, what they have got, why we feel we can indulge ourselves in this therapeutic moment is that COVID is finally winding down and the economy is just roaring. I'm out here in Silicon Valley. There would be animal spirits at this time of year anyway. It's spring. But COVID is ending. The Fed has injected cash into the economy. It's let's do deals. I mean, it's buoyant out. The mood is actually buoyant. How long can this last? How long can we remain unserious, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
Well, first of all, for the people who did not suffer economically because of COVID, things are great. A lot of them saved a lot of money because they didn't travel to Europe as much or anywhere in the world as they would have done. So they're doing fine, which is why relief bills should have been carefully targeted to the millions of people who had a terrible time of it, who did lose their jobs, who did lose work, and were not able to do all sorts of things, who feared losing their homes and just all of this stuff. That's why the relief should have been to those people to give them money because there was this enormous circumstance beyond their control. Now, there was a great story in the first year of the Bill Clinton administration. Remember that Clinton got elected on healthcare reform, big platform, and he was going to pass the national healthcare bill that Democrats had wanted to do for a generation or more, even by that time. And he put his wife in charge. So Pat Moynihan, who was the senator from New York, whom she would later take his place, says to Hillary Clinton, kind of pulls her aside and says, look, all the big things in the past have passed with 70 or more votes in the Senate. 70 or more votes. If it's big, you've got to have a kind of a bipartisan, a national consensus that was reflected in 70 votes. And she told him to jump in the lake. She didn't want to hear it. He's an old man. What do you know? And so she went ahead and she failed. But the fact is, I think that's still true. Obamacare, which was a lot less than some Democrats wanted, got through because Democrats had 60 votes in the Senate for, I think it was 130 days. There was a 130-day period where they had 60 votes in the Senate, and they used it wisely from their point of view to get this bill through over a filibuster. So now Democrats have this the agenda we've been discussing. I think they won't be able to do a lot of this. And so eventually some sort of equilibrium will be reached. Maybe Republicans will win the House in 2022. And we won't even think about it, this Biden agenda at all, because there won't be one. Right. And the bigger thing will be what the Democratic Party is going to do with an 80-plus-year-old president who wants to be reelected and serve until he's 86 years old, and whether they're comfortable with that. As far as Russia and China is concerned, I don't know. Clearly, Russia is being very aggressive now. And what we've seen, and if you talk to Republicans on the Hill, they would always say in the Trump years, I don't know why Trump just kind of lays off Russia entirely in his public statements, but he's been very tough in his policy toward Russia.
Right.
And now Biden is kind of doing the opposite. And so
it's the opposite that's more dangerous.
Of course, it's more dangerous. So he said the right things. You get a readout of his call with Putin, and he gives him the business about this or that, according to our readout of it. But here you have the Russians are massing troops. So we'll see what happens there. I don't know. We'll see what Biden does.
Hey, Byron, I know you got to run. I just want one more question for you. If we send everybody money, which we've done, and the economy comes roaring back, and whatever debt bomb we're constructing for ourselves is a long fuse. It's not just tomorrow. It's not just the day after tomorrow, but it's 20 years from now. I don't have to worry about that. Isn't that a winning platform for a political party? We have sent you money.
Yes.
And the economy is doing well. and we sent you money. I mean, if this works, then haven't we reverted to this old style, big Democratic majority country, big Democratic majority in the House and the Senate, and then these little tiny cavilling Republicans off in the corner saying something like, "Well, that just doesn't seem right. Like we got to be it." Isn't Joe Biden, who is so old, he probably remembers this from his teenage years, bringing us back to if not the New Deal, then the war on poverty, then the Great Society.
Well, Franklin Roosevelt was president when Joe Biden was born, and of
Going to
course,
the prom.
Of course, we're getting in this sending you money thing. Donald Trump did the same thing. As a matter of fact, what I have to tell you, just as not my opinion, but I was stunned in the election, in the campaign of 2020. Remember, during the transition, after he's lost, he talks about raising the COVID relief to $2,000 a person. I thought,
right.
Why didn't you say that in August or September? Just you would be buying votes. And that's one way to get votes, is to buy them.
Yeah.
So I was
Proven
stunned
model
that he didn't do that. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that's essentially bipartisan now. And Republicans have always had this reputation for just wanting to do a little less than Democrats. Like Democrats will send you a lot of money, and we'll send you a little less money, and we'll feel better about it, I guess.
Well, Byron, we've had a lot of you, and we feel great about that. We'd like to have more, but if anybody does want to listen to, and of course you all do, the Byron York Show is available on the Ricochet Audio Network. You can follow him on Twitter, of course, at Byron York. And thank you for joining us today. Always a pleasure. We could go on for another hour and a half, forever and a day, but we're going to have to save those precious moments for later. Thanks for joining us today, Byron.
Thanks, Byron.
Go put on a bathrobe, will you?
Nice tie. We are joined now by a civilian, but I think he's a citizen activist. It's Andrew Gutmann. He's the author of a letter to the parents of the Brearly School, which is a fancy private day school in Manhattan. And he explained his disappointment about the school's movement towards a social justice agenda and the decision to enroll his daughter elsewhere. He wrote a letter to all of the parents. The letter came to the attention of Barry Weiss. It also came to the attention of the head of school, Jane Freed, who, full disclosure, is a friend of mine. And she shared it with the rest of us. The letter, by the way, welcome, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. So the letter said something that we've all felt in schools, that we've seen in schools from universities, like that famous picture of the students screaming at the Yale professor. By the way, students screaming at the progressive Yale professor, all the way through the racial equity or whatever it's called, that curriculum in the California school system, to Brearly. How bad is it?
Bad. I didn't realize until this week how bad it is. I mean, I only knew from my daughter's school, but what I've gotten in the last week is literally hundreds and hundreds of emails and messages from people all around the country saying they're having the same issues, saying people are afraid to speak up. This is from public schools. This is private schools. This is even some religious schools, kindergarten through medical school. I've had people write to me. This is, in my view, and in a lot of people's views, really, really bad, what is going on. And it's this indoctrination. It's this not, ability to let people think for themselves. This is not a race issue, as I've tried to correct a lot of people. This is really an education issue.
So
and a cancel
let
culture issue.
So let me just quote from your letter, which one of the most eloquent parts. It's a great letter. If Brearley's administration was truly concerned about so-called equity, it would be discussing the cessation of admissions preferences for legacies, siblings, and those families with especially deep pockets. If the administration was genuinely serious about diversity, it would not insist on the indoctrination of its students and their families to a single mindset, most reminiscent of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. All right, that was a good one. I mean, you're going to get in trouble for that no matter what. But I mean, let me just be super blunt. I went to one of these schools. They were super liberal.
Yeah.
I thought that Ronald Reagan was going to blow us all up in a nuclear holocaust, and he didn't. And then I co-founded with my very conservative friend Peter Robinson a center-right podcast network. So I turned out okay. I mean, does that
long silence is fitting?
It's not okay. I don't think this is not just I had political correctness too and multiculturalism. The decades ago when I was in school. That's not what this is, and it has accelerated. This has been I'm just learning about this. This has been in the works now apparently for a long time. This critical race theory, an offshoot of postmodernism. I don't know much about it, but this has accelerated to in orders of magnitude in the last year. Since George Floyd, and I think also because of COVID, that they were able to do this without a lot of resistance. This is not just run-of-the-mill, garden variety, political correctness, diversity, multiculturalism. I think this is much, much worse.
So, Andrew, may I take a moment to place you, and as best I can, the Brearly School. You're not just an investment banker in New York. Former investment banker, but
right.
You wrote How to Be an Investment Banker. You are in every regard what Tom Wolfe described in Vanity of the Bandfires as a master of the universe.
Nah, I'm middle class. Look, wait.
Yeah.
No. Yes, wealthy for United States standards. I am very middle class for New York City private school standards.
Okay, fine. I'll grant you that because that takes us on to Brearly. What I want to say is simply that overwhelmingly for the parents at Brearly, even the $60,000 a year is not a problem. It's just not a problem. Getting into the school, getting their kids accepted is the problem. So the question I have here is, I have two questions. Was there any conceivable educational benefit to moving so hard left, or to becoming so progressive, or if I'm putting it in a sloppy way, correct the way I'm putting it. Was there any possible educational benefit to the kids themselves, or was this the faculty indulging itself in some way? And why do the parents put up with it? If they're so rich, go found a new school. What are the dynamics here that enable this to happen?
Okay, I'll be very honest. I don't know exactly what goes on behind the scenes. I'm not on the board. I don't know people really directly on the board, although, we've talked to people. First question, do I think there's of any benefit to this? No, I don't. They're starting the process of, eradicating the history and the classical literature type curriculums, the civics type curriculums, which has been decimated for a long time, but again, to an umpteenth degree now, and not having, the ability for children to really think for themselves. No discussion really on these kind of issues. So no, I don't think there's a benefit to this. I think it's an enormous detriment. And especially there's a lot of indoctrination on this. Second question, how does this happen? A lot of it is the cancel culture, is the fear. I believe what I said in my letter, which is that more than half of the parents agree with at least a lot to most to all of what I wrote. And not everybody agrees with all of it, but a lot of it. Very, very few people are speaking up. There's a couple of constituencies that have spoken up. We tried to speak up through the year. I spoke to a lot of parents that agreed and tried to get them to speak up. And the answer almost always is, I can't. Fear of losing your job, fear of pissing off the school, because you need the school. You need the school for college admissions, for exmissions.
Okay.
It's what the school. Look, private schools like this are, public schools run for the teachers' unions. I think most of us know that. Private schools like this are run for the institution. Protect the institution, and that's exactly what they're doing this week. How can we protect the institution? I believe I've heard that, the board gave a unanimous vote to support the school's continuing anti-racism policies. I know there are board members who agree with some to all of my views.
Right.
But they are protecting the institution, and people are not speaking up. If you ask me why I wrote the letter, it wasn't to educate people. It was to give them, a little bit some ammunition, but mostly some cover, begging them, please, you've got to speak up on this.
What did your kids say? What did your spouse say? What the hell are you doing, Andrew? Rocking this boat, which is such a beautiful boat in all kinds of ways. The introductions it enables your children to make, the golden road from Brearly to an elite institution to a life of wealth and privilege. What are you doing?
Thought it had to be done, to be honest. This is I know I hurt, the reputation of the institution in some sense. I thought this was the proverbial, sometimes you have to amputate to save the patient. I care deeply about education. I really do. I care deeply about my daughter's education. I think what is happening to education, and I've learned more in the last week, is terrible. And the impact on our future as a country is horrific as we're training these kids in what we're training them in. So I just thought it had to be done.
So where do you go now? I mean, you can't go to a public school because the public schools have this kind of, that they have essentially the same ideology and considerably less. I mean, you talk about parental input. It's considerably less parental input there than there is at Brearly or a place like that. If you're a parent of a school-aged child, what do? Homeschool?
That's what we're going to do, probably, for a year and try it out. If we can find a few like-minded families, we might try one of these pods that people have done since COVID in the last year, but we're going to give that a shot. I've had people in the last few days say, maybe consider starting a school, which is something that I've been maybe thinking about. I have some strong views on education and curriculum that are somewhat different, more secular classical than what schools really teach these days. So it's something I'd like to think about. I'm not saying, it's easy. Most families can't do it, what we will do and what we'll try to do. And maybe there are schools out there. I'm sure there are. I've had people reach out to me and say, look, there are schools out there that aren't quite doing this, or at least aren't doing this yet.
So it's sort of disorganized. I'm sorry, probably my fault, but just so we know. So you wrote a letter after you pulled your daughter from school to explain to the
she's still in school.
She's still there.
She's still in school. They later to say she's remote, so we don't have to worry about too many issues, but she's still there. I will say, the administration, I won't say much about, but the teachers have been tremendous and supportive, and my daughter is doing very well. She knows what's going on. She is supportive of what's going on. She actually wrote on her own, which we had to tone down at the end, a strong email to Jane. Uh-oh. I tried, if you're friendly with Jane, if you can pass this message, which is I tried to send her an email saying basically as a human being, I'm sure I can appreciate what she is going through. I know it is difficult because it's been difficult for me. That got bounced back because I've been completely excommunicated from the Church of Brearly. I'm not allowed to email anybody. It gets bounced back. But my daughter's doing well. She's still in school. So.
Okay. So let me, I know James wants to get in, but let me just, if you're, as a parent, you're kind of checkmated, right? And then if you're lucky, your daughter does really well and she goes to pick a fancy college, it's going to be there too. Like there's no way out of this bubble. But here's my cynical pitch to you, or my cynical analysis, that one of the things that's happened at these schools has been it's getting harder and harder and harder to place those students in the Ivy League institutions they used to waltz into. Those universities are more competitive. Those universities are more are looking further and further afield for their students. It's harder to get, I kind of waltzed, frankly. I don't think I certainly know with my grades and my academic achievement, I wouldn't be going to Yale if I was graduating from high school this year, right? I wouldn't make it. I wouldn't be qualified. In 1983, I was super qualified. When you strip away the natural deal that a lot of parents feel, I mean, the subconscious deal, I spend $55,000, I send my kid to a school, I let it happen, and that kid then goes to Harvard. If you take that second part away, the quo of the quid pro quo, then all you're left with is an education. Mm-hmm. And if you don't like the product,
it's no good.
The product is no good.
Yeah.
People, okay. This is back to Peter's question. An awful lot of people are not there for the education, right? They're there for the status symbol and for the doors that it opens and for the network and for getting you into, the Harvards and Yales of the world. I want my daughter to get a really, really, really good education. I think, we're losing this is a much broader topic. We're losing the enlightenment here with everything that is going on. And I want her to be one of the few that actually still knows the classics. I did not get that education. I had a public school, a decent public school education, not really in the classics. I want her to have that. I want to make sure she gets that. I think there is some aspect of that still at a Brearly, but I don't think there'll be much of it. If we continue down this path, there will be very little of it down the road. There was a Brearly student who wrote a rebuttal. I don't want to say much, but one of the things I think she said was, we still teach Latin. Yeah, but for how much longer? I don't think much longer going down the right direction that we are.
So Andrew, I'm sorry. I just want to bear in on Rob's question. Yeah. Actually, I just want to ask the same question all over again, because it strikes me as...
You don't like my answer?
I like the answer I want. No, well, if you're not there for the education, you're there for the deal. And here's the deal. Spend a ton of money. Keep your mouth shut.
Right.
Make sure the kids do well in their grades. And in fact, of course, one of the secrets, one of the dirty secrets at these schools is that even after you spend the $60,000 a year, you're expected to spend money on tutors as well, because of course, donations. Right. So spend the money, keep your mouth shut, because here's what happens.
Yeah.
Your child goes to Columbia or Harvard or Yale. I mean, if it's a catastrophe, Amherst or Williams. But the very diversity nonsense, whatever the word is, that is now part of the deal at Brearly. Shut up and put up with this. Sign up on it. It's eroding the deal. All those institutions have faculty. All the institutions I just named have faculty that want students. A big thing is we're all one world now. Let's get our students from Ghana, not Manhattan. Let's get our students from Malaysia, not Bronxville. The deal is going to go away too. And then what happens to Brearly?
That's a good point. I mean, I haven't honestly thought in that sense. It is absolutely harder to get into those universities these days. It is more competitive. I don't know what happened. I'm not looking that far. I want to fix the educational aspect of it to the extent we can. What happens to the institution? We need new institutions. We need institutions that are actually, again, I think go back to more of a secular classical education, and that are there for the children, not for the institution.
This is all the things that you're saying about what should take place in a school. My heart is just leaping when I listen to you. And I think, wow, this guy's tough. He can write. He's made money in extremely competitive markets. Make that guy headmaster and start a news. Find some derelict brown house someplace. And then, of course, what I think is he starts a school and Bill de Blasio goes after him in a nanosecond. The regulatory wars that will be launched against you. Move to Texas, I guess.
I want to look into it. I really, really do. And I will say this, Ed, if I do something or someone does something like this, it should not just be for elites, not just for the Brearly students. I think everybody, you should have tracking within the school. I do believe that. But everybody should have the opportunity to get this kind of education. And more than everything else, it's sort of the history and the civics that we have completely lost in education in this country over many, many, many decades. And as I wrote in my letter, we have the most unwise and unvirtuous leadership of both political parties at all levels of government because people don't know, they are not getting this history and civics education. And that's something that we need at not just of the elites that go to Brearly.
Andrew, you mentioned before that we're losing the Enlightenment. I don't think we're losing it. I don't think losing it in the sense we lost our car keys. I think we dug a pit and pushed it in and set it on fire. When I read your letter, I was struck by so many things of it. I mean, it's just brilliant piece of work. It was like watching the arrows of crossbows darken the sky. Every point that you made was so good. And so the thing that I did not get from your letter was, I don't know if this guy's a Democrat or Republican, because I got the sense that you were a classic American, that you were invested in classic American ideas and virtues. So what you're saying transcends political ideology in many ways. And there's the hope that we can get people together to fight this. But the problem is since they have come up with new definitions of what it means to be American, they've come up with new definitions of history. They have established a mantle and chosen and claimed for themselves a mantle of virtue that means anybody who is attacking them on their ideas is morally suspect. You're not a good person. Because the only answer to what they are putting forth are the classic American ideas, which they have already set aside as being unworthy of future study. So it makes me think that there is no way we can reform any institution that has steeped itself in marinates in skin critical race theory. The only way is to separate it and find a parallel institutional apparatus of our own. Or is it possible? Is it possible for these institutions that you've described all over the country, from what you're hearing, to ameliorate, to change, to react to the pushback and pull back from this? Or is it frankly got its roots in so deep there's no hope?
I think I think there's some possibility, and to solve the school problem, we have to solve the cancel culture problem, because too many people are afraid to speak up. I do think if enough people spoke up, at least in a private school setting, in a school like Brearly, it might be able to be reversed. Fully no, but to some extent. I'm not optimistic about that. I think we have to build new, and that's hard. That's really, really, really hard to do that. But you're right. I'll answer the political question. Yeah, I'm like a lot of people, politically homeless.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're going to start in New York, you're going to have to find a building that looks like the school's been there for 100 years, right?
Right. You know what? I was thinking this. I don't. Again, it's about education. I'm not. I'll say this, and this might be somewhat controversial from an educational standpoint. I don't believe in a whole lot of technology. Books and blackboards, I think, is a much, much better way of teaching. I can tell you this: in every class my daughter has, where they have all these fancy whiteboards and technology, the teacher's spending half the time trying to get it to work.
It never works.
Such a waste of time. And now, when things are remote, it's a completely different story. But no, you need the proverbial one-room schoolhouse here.
Yeah.
And really, really, really good teachers. And they are out there. And a lot of those really, really, really good teachers are the ones that have left institutions like Brearly because they can't deal with this stuff. They just want to teach. They want to teach really well. I think those people are out there. So I think, you don't need a whole lot to get this started. I hope I'm right.
I think you are right. I mean, I think that this is exciting. Look, there were a lot of people who did this in the 50s and 60s. They started schools. They started, the best practices of the intellectual movement of the 50s and 60s. Those schools now seem incredibly outdated and quaint, or incredibly hippie and radical, but the impulse was there. It was the same impulse. Can I just go back to the TikTok of the moment?
Sure.
Because it seems to me that this didn't just happen. I mean, you probably sitting around rolling your eyes at stuff. Your daughter would come and you just see this, or you'd read. They're telling you what you're learning X and Y instead of A and B. All the parents I know who have this experience say, like, you don't know when World War I was, but you're going to tell me, some other nonsense, right? Okay. First thing is, what was the moment where you said, okay, enough? That's my first question. Yeah. Was there a moment? What was it? What was that moment? Because the parents all around are like, okay, how far is too far?
There was no, that was a moment when I decided to write the letter. There was no one instance where I said, this is just ridiculous. We have to stop this. I've been trying to organize behind the scenes, since the beginning of this school year. Again, as I said earlier, since George Floyd is when, and BLM is when this is really accelerated. It became obvious that not enough people were going to speak up. Right. I said, when we decided not to send her back next year, and that was that was my daughter's decision as well. We didn't say, we're not letting you go back. We're saying, what do you want to do? Do you want to go back? And so she was fully supportive of that. And when we said we're not going back next year, I said, okay, you know what? I'm not cancelable professionally. I'm no longer cancelable by the school, and this has to be done. And so I did it.
So my second question is this. I mean, it's one thing to disagree with a set of principles, even a philosophy. It's it's perfectly legitimate to propose a philosophy and have it rejected or have it debated. The argument against your letter that came from the head of school, among others, is that it made students feel unsafe.
Yeah.
They felt unsafe.
Yeah.
To me, it's
I'd love to address that.
Yeah, it was like, first of all, I want to say, like, it's impossible to argue. It's impossible to debate somebody if your argument is an assault on them. So they can't marshal a counter argument. Instead, they retreat and say, "Stop beating me over the head with your facts." Right. And then the second thing is, were there no parents that rolled their eyes and laughed at this? They feel unsafe.
Oh, yeah.
They really feel unsafe?
I've talked to a lot of people that were very, very unhappy with Jane's letter for that reason, especially, and for some other reasons. That was striking to me. It was absolutely striking, because what we have always been told in the 7 years at Brearly is what they want more than anything else. You have to understand, this is not just a really good school. This is considered really, really one of the top girls' schools.
Right.
What
It's a great school.
Said is that we want, number one priority, girls with adventurous intellect, brave intellect, courageous girls intellectually. And here you're saying that our high schoolers are afraid of a piece of paper being mailed to their parents. I mean, that was, words hardly describe, that was really shocking to me. And I think an awful lot of parents picked up on that. This is what I say. Sorry?
It infantilizes them, and it also turns I'll
go forward. Parents, there's a letter circulating by two parents in my daughter's grade who are also alums. Parents are saying the same thing, that it was frightening to them. This is the culture we're living in. This is not just Brearly. This is not just private school. This is not just New York. It's not just schools. What's going on? This is losing the enlightenment, that people are afraid to have a conversation. My letter was not about race. My letter was about education, but broadly, it was about being able to have a conversation about these issues, not sticking your fingers in your ear and saying, "We won't talk about it, you're a racist." That's what they're doing.
Right. They infer from what you said a whole raft of issues and ideas behind it, which they believe naturally results in about 36 hours later in Nazi Germany. But
I'll tell you, speaking of Nazi Germany, I'll say, so this letter from the two parents, after calling me a vile racist or whatever, and saying I did it for the fame and fortune, goes on to say something like this, and I can't quote it, but we are shocked that there are still parents that aren't with us on this anti-racism curriculum, on these initiatives. And that there aren't parents with us and families with us means we have failed. And we need to double our efforts to make sure every family, this is, insert your communist, fascist, whatever analogy here, this is unbelievably scary that you have parents, moms saying this.
Andrew, I was about to say, this is an observation. Actually, what it is a plea. I've been sitting here looking at you thinking, oh my goodness. And then a moment ago, Rob asked his question about the current institutions, and you said you're skeptical. You think we need to build new institutions. So here's what I would almost beg you to do. I look at you and say, he's right. Furthermore, he is, by the standards of most Americans, almost impeccably positioned to make the effort of starting an institution. He's got money in the bank. He's articulate. He knows how to write. He has clearly formed ideas about education. My plea is, first of all, do it. But in the second place, start a podcast journal, because all kinds of people are saying, yes, we have to do this, but how? How is it done? And I would download you and listen to this in the car and say, what's going on with Gutmann? What's the latest on fundraising? What's the latest on how do you find a building that can be used as a school? What are the latest on regulators, and how do you get teachers accredited, or can you get people to volunteer how do you do it? Just how do you do it? I just have the feeling you're in a position to perform a huge service. Really, I don't want to get, I mean, maybe after the show, Scott can add the national anthem swelling up right now at this point in my speech, but you're in a position to perform a service to the nation. I really think.
Yeah, but who would carry that podcast? Oh, wait a minute.
Well, I have strong views on a lot of other topics too, if you want to talk about them. Non-mainstream.
First things first, Buster.
Yeah, I know. No, I thank you. I want to seriously think about it. Not obviously, not more than seriously think about it. I want to try to figure out how to do it. There's a number of things that I'd like to do now on this issue and related issues, and I have to figure out. I mean, this has been overwhelming the last few days.
Well, we look forward to hearing all of these strong opinions you have. For example, Star Wars, the prequels, are they good or are they bad?
Well, I wrote something on this. Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm testing the depth and breadth, because if you're one of those people who can talk for an hour about Star Wars versus Star Trek,
the prequels look a lot better now after obviously the newer ones, which I thought were atrocious.
Fascinating.
I left the theater when they killed Luke Skywalker. Devastating. I mean, I was a big fan. This was my age, and that Luke Skywalker was this is an icon of what they did was so sad. So I hated what Disney has done with the new movies. The prequels, I can't say they're good movies, but at least what George Lucas was trying to do is expand the universe. I have actually written about this on my blog. I write occasionally, if you're really interested. If you want to invite me back, we can talk more about it.
Yeah, first of all, this means we're going to have to put a spoiler on the podcast because you mentioned that Skywalker dies. Not everybody's seen it, dude.
Right.
So, but secondly, yes, we will have you on this because I have the feeling that I could ask you about 20th century ceramic techniques and whether you prefer a matte finish or a shiny, and you'd have an opinion on it, and it would be fun to listen to. So, yeah, we got to have you back on this and many other things. Thank you for joining us today, Mr.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck, Andrew.
Great pleasure.
Talk to you soon.